I'm Wendy Roderick from Roderick Cattle Company, and we are outside of Marfa, Texas, and far west Texas, and we're running 66,000 acres right now. I do not know what sustainability means. I heard that word the first time about 2 years ago when I took my daughter to the San Antonio Livestock Show. I'm not so sure about the global warming thing because I don't understand it that much, but I'll tell you that out here it's cyclical. And the rain is different now than it was 100 years ago. Yeah, my biggest worry for the next 5 years is water, is getting enough rainfall to stay active in the ranching business. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's profitability. You know, I have to be able to make money doing this. I mean, we love doing it, but it's still a business. My hopes for this is that my kids can take it. I want my kids and I want Roll's kids, you know, I want this to continue to be a family operation that doesn't have any outside ties to, you know, big business or anything crazy. I want them to keep doing it. I want them to keep working. That's all I want at the end of the day.
So my goal is that after me and my brother complete our undergraduate degrees, we will take over Roderick Cattle Company and build upon the foundation that my parents created. Of course, they'll still be alongside us, but we really want to send this company forward and combine quality and quantity in terms of the beef industry.
I'm Greg Henderson. I'm the editorial director of Drovers at Farm Journal. Beef production today is much different than it was 30 years ago. We know the world is changing, and at Drovers we believe it is our responsibility to help beef producers and ranchers be ready for the changes that are coming.
I'm Amy Sketchless-Cole. I'm the Executive Vice President of Trust in Food. Trust in Food is a division at Farm Journal that focuses on sustainability solutions. In 25 years, I have only witnessed consumers casting agriculture as ecological villains. Today, we see that story starting to change. We see that agriculture, like cattle production, has the potential to be net positive from an environmental perspective. And this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to actually change the narrative and change the story with real-life facts of how American beef production is constantly and continuously improving both its footprint and its outreach to the consumers that depend on it.
I think with the changing world, I think we're going to have to do a lot with sustainability. There's that fancy word again. And trying to move the cattle industry towards a sustainable fashion, but also we need to communicate this world better to the rest of the world because not a lot of people know where beef comes from and what it takes to get from pasture to plate.
My name is Drew Slattery, and I'm the program manager for Trust in Beef. The biggest contributor to a beef operation's ability to thrive in the next decade is going to be their ability to navigate and respond to a rapidly changing world. Our job is to empower them to do that. We translate all the noise coming from consumers and the supply chain around sustainability for the producer. That way, they understand what is being asked of their operation and why. Once they understand that, we connect them with the information, tools, resources, and advisors that they need in order to evolve their operation in a way that works for them.
I mean, I need to understand why you want to make the changes. You know, I don't think we can be naive in these situations. We have to understand. And you would have to explain to me what you want and then probably prove to me that it's a better way. Education is the future. For us, we have to take care of this ranch because if we don't take care of it today, there is no tomorrow and there is no future. So we have to do what's right.
One of the many things I think we'll need is advisors moving towards the future because there's so many unknowns. We're going to need some guidance to help us explain the change.
You have to conserve what you have. That's what it means to me. And so if we take care of everything, that means that we will have a place tomorrow.
Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for watching our new video there just about the Trust in Beef program, which is Farm Journal and Drovers collaboration with a number of partners, including some of whom that are on this call with me, to empower beef producers on their sustainability journey. So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the beef sustainability journey. I am so excited to have some great panelists here with me today. Just some housekeeping before we dive in. We will get a link to the video in the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. You can also ask questions in that Q&A. So even if you don't see a bar that says Q&A right now, if you sort of scroll your mouse to the bottom, it'll pop up and it'll say Q&A. You can ask questions there and all of the panelists can see it. I'll keep an eye on it. I'm your moderator, Amy Scotchels-Cole. I'm the Executive Vice President of Trust and Food at Farm Journal, and I'm super excited to have everyone here with us today. We're diving in. This is the State of Sustainable Ranching Farm Country Update from Farm Journal. And just to provide, 1 minute of context here, beef is very much in the news these days, and it feels like maybe too many things in our country that there are two totally different narratives out there, right? On one hand, we've got beef as this villain that is driving climate change and degradation and something that people should not be eating or they should feel guilty about. We've got websites that are, taking recipes for beef off of their websites. It's definitely in the moment right now to villainize beef. And at the other hand, we've got the regenerative agriculture community that has come out strong and said, wait a second, cattle on pasture is a really, really important part of regenerative agriculture. It can have net positive benefits for the environment. It's important for our open space. It's critically important for the soil health and the ecosystems and the places where these cattle are grazing. And frankly, beef producers are doing more than their fair share even today to protect environmental concerns like climate change and water quality and water availability. So we've got these two perspectives in the world. I'm not sure that our panel is going to get us to the answer in there, but I think what they will do is give us a sense of how each of them in their positions see the industry writ large navigating this really complex and timely topic that is getting a lot of attention. So let me go ahead and jump in and introduce our terrific panel. We've got Jeanette Bernard, who is with the Merck Animal Health Ventures team. Hey, Jeanette. We have Kent Harrison, who is the Vice President of Marketing and Premium Programs at Tyson Foods. Hey, Kent. And last and certainly not least, we've got Debbie Lyons-Blythe, who is with Blythe Family Farms, a rancher herself, as well as the incoming chair for the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. So welcome all of you. Welcome to our audience who is here with us. As a reminder, scroll down to the bottom of your screen. You can find the Q&A. And we are happy to answer questions as we go along. I'll keep an eye on that there. So I'm going to start with you, Debbie, but ask each of our panelists to just set the stage for us. What is it that we're talking about when we talk about sustainable beef? Is this a newfangled thing, Debbie?
Wow. So just hit me with the tough question right at the beginning, right? What is sustainable beef? So I think if you were to ask anybody what their definition of sustainable beef is, everybody would have a different definition. I feel like that depending even on what sector you are within the industry or if as a consumer, everybody has a different definition. So on Blythe Family Farms and through my experience with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, we've defined it with some really big boardroom language, right? But my foundation is take care of the land, take care of animals, take care of the people, and make money. So to me, that's pretty much the foundation of what sustainable beef is on Blythe Family Farms.
That doesn't sound too hard. Is it hard?
Well, yeah, it can be hard, but that's not a bad thing too. You got to set your goals high.
Very good. Very good. Kent, Jeanette, you want to jump in with how you all think about what is sustainable beef?
Sure, I'll jump in. I mean, I'll just start by saying I actually hate the word sustainability. Like, it makes me cringe. As Debbie said, I don't know how to define it. Everybody has a different definition. I can't buy one unit of sustainability. I can't see a unit of sustainability or hold that in my hands. It's squishy and it's vague. And I think that squishy, vague terms typically set everyone up for failure, right? So the way I think about it is, if you look at the entire beef value chain, how are we ensuring that producers are able to continue to be profitable, or able to be profitable? We can debate that. And then how are we ensuring that we're meeting consumer expectations? Obviously, right now, the conversation is really heavy around what are the environmental implications of that, of the beef value chain. But I think if you look at it from a full value chain perspective, that's where we start to see some opportunities for brands to start marketing around specific claims, start to see some aligned supply chains where we're driving specific production attributes and specific, not to use the S word, but specific sustainability attributes, whether that's carbon neutral or whatever that is, through to the brand level. And then instead of a tell our story approach, we're able to market those brands, market those attributes specifically to specific segments of consumers. So my interest is really from a full value chain perspective.
I think that's a perfect tee up for you, Kent.
Yeah, I tell you what, one thing that came out from listening to both Debbie and Janet is that making some money doing these sustainable practices is also important, because having a sustainable economic model is so critical. It is one of those things that's sort of the antithesis of what the consumer actually wants to think about when they think about sustainability. They don't want it to be about making money. They would just want it to be about making the world a wonderful place, which those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I think that's an enormous hurdle, because all of the value that's in any supply chain, whether it's branded or commercial cattle, is held with the consumer. The consumer is where the dollars flow from. The good news is that beef has the upper hand compared to all the other proteins. Coming from a company where we deal with pork and chicken and a little bit of turkey, we get to see all of those. And whenever there's a cyclical downswing in beef, those who've lived through 2 or 3 cycles of that, and everybody starts to talk about, well, what's wrong with the demand for beef? And we go, hold on a second. This is just either a production or a consumption thing. Demand is always very good, because as long as you have some sort of comparable price equilibrium with other proteins, and as long as beef is relatively affordable, we find time and again consumers want to eat beef. They want a burger, they want a steak, and they will do that before they'll pick up a pork chop. And heaven forbid, blasphemy as it may be with Tyson in my title, is chicken. Please give me a break. However, again, that value is rooted in the consumer. So we have to be super conscious of how that consumer sees and views things. And sometimes that means going against what is our better nature as producers and people in the industry to try to explain everything, because the consumer is making a lot of decisions based on how they feel. And so figuring out how they feel and have that still be in concert with the reality of what's going on at the ranch and the farm, I think is the key to making sure that everybody's happy in the entire supply chain.
Great overview. And I just want to follow up with a question, which is, give us a snapshot of what you do see in terms of what consumers want. And specifically, is there an age differential? Is Gen Z demanding something different? Are millennials demanding something different? Like, give us the round the world. If we talked about what beef sustainability looks like, what do consumers think about beef today?
Well, let me jump in, and then I'll throw it back to Debbie and to Janet. What we're finding is that the older consumers will gravitate to the tried and true information that they've grown up with. The 56 plus looks at the world from the perspective of USDA meat grades, and they pretty much get them correct in their mind when you ask them what each grade means. And then they throw in some of the perpetual Angus as a raising claim, which is great. I mean, having that understanding of Angus as a relative quality indicator helps to float all the boats higher. When you get to the millennials and you get to the Gen Z, so really anybody from 39 and down, they start to really gravitate to things that are a little more specific in their claims, like all natural. They're looking for environmental and or climate claims, organic claims. One of the things that's come out in an enormous way, as we've seen this proliferation of at least media around grass-fed, is that they're interested in what the animals eat. So vegetarian diet, grass and grain-fed, and then critical difference with from the Gen Xers and baby boomers to now the millennials and the Gen Zs being the ones driving the economic model is they want to understand animal welfare. They have a critical inherent need back to that feeling of being a good person to know that the animal was humanely raised. The good news again is that's what ranchers and farmers have been doing for decades and since the dawn of time.
So that's super helpful. So then I want to throw it back to Debbie. Debbie, you are out talking to folks of all stripes, right? In your role for the U.S. Roundtable. What do you talk about that you think consumers are caring about when you talk about the operations, your operation and what you're doing on it?
Right. So I think one of the most important things is to remember whether you're a member of the beef value chain or you're a consumer is to learn and for it to be re-emphasized that farmers and ranchers have always been focused on efficiencies, doing things better. Whose grandpa didn't tell them to do a better job with the land so that it ends up better than what you originally got it? Right? That's a foundational belief for all of us. In addition, you got to remember the legacy and the heritage of passing down the operation. If you're going to be able to pass down the operation, you have to do a good job with it. But I think that just those feel-good messages are good. They help consumers understand, but I think it's also important that we are able to back that up with some facts. So at the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, one of the things that we're really working on is actually compiling a lot of that information and showing what people are doing. So one of the key questions that we have for farmers and ranchers specifically when we measure sustainability is, do you have a grazing management plan? Because if you do, you are impacting not only land resources and water resources, but also air and greenhouse gases. So that is a pretty foundational question, but I'm surprised that a lot of farmers and ranchers, they work from a plan. It's usually in their head. It might not be really, really formal, but if the more formal we make it, you're looking at measuring then, right? The more formal you make it, you're able to measure against how well you've done in the past and what you're doing in the future. So the better impact you make to those key indicators. And at the roundtable, so not only have we identified 6 key indicators to measure specifically sustainability across the industry. So it's not just one of those things, right? It's all of those things. But we're also measuring it across the entire beef value chain. So it's not just at the ranch. If they continually point directly back to the ranch, then we're really not going to directly impact only sustainability. We need the entire value chain working together. And that's what the roundtable has been doing. We're looking at all those indicators all along the value chain.
That's awesome. You mentioned the grazing management plan, and so our program did some research this past summer, and we found out, and I'll see what people's reactions are to this, that about 58% of the beef producers that we surveyed, so we surveyed over 900 producers across every beef producing state, about 58% of them did say that they had a formal grazing management plan. Does that number seem high, low, surprise you?
So that's a little bit higher than what I've heard, but I do think, though, that it's appropriate to say, too, that we haven't directly, strictly, and I don't know how your survey did, we've not strictly defined what a grazing management plan is. So one of the ways that we're able to talk about sustainability across the entire nation is that we are not being prescriptive. We are saying, let's all do better, but better locally, right? So that you can't compare how we raise cattle in Montana versus Alabama. Right. You can't even compare how we raise cattle in Eastern Kansas versus Western Kansas, but you can all answer, do you have a grazing management plan? And if you do, you're doing a better job.
I think that's a fascinating perspective. Janet, I don't want to step on your toes. I know you've probably got stuff to say about this too, but your idea, Debbie, that they've been practicing these cattle and ranching management practices essentially for so long that are best in class and best in the world. And yet, just the simple fact of sort of formalizing what they know to be best for their ranch and for the land from generations and generations inside of a grazing management plan is important. And I think sometimes it goes against perhaps what ranchers and farmers believe is necessary, because, well, why do I need to share this information? Shouldn't it just come out in the quality of the product? And then if you go back to looking at that consumer again, yeah, that used to be kind of the case, right? And we've done such a great job of making beef climb up into higher and higher percentages of choice that people just naturally across the entire thing feel like this is delicious. For the most of the supply. However, you get into those younger cohorts again, and they're like, well, I need to, because I've been always had access to every piece of information the world's been able to offer to me. I need to know somehow that that's true through a document and maybe through third-party verification. Does that mean we're trying to catch ranchers or farmers or indicate that they're not doing well? No, the opposite. We want to be able to have a vehicle to express through those plans and through the audits that, no, we are doing wonderful things in the industry.
That's right.
Yeah,
Jim,
I would
that's
just
actually
add,
a perfect segue, right? You tell us about the world that you live in and how it's making that easier and hopefully easier for the rancher, easier for the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just add on to the conversation, though, that just as ranchers are not a monolith, and you have that variation from Washington State to Florida and how we manage cattle, and even to the example of within Kansas, different regions of how we manage cattle, in that same way, consumers are not a monolith, right? And I think we get into really dangerous territory when either of those ends of the supply chain get treated as a monolith, because they are not. And I think what we've seen work in the beef industry in the last 40 years of, you know, some of these like mass campaigns that are targeted at lifting demand for beef, not any specific type of beef, but beef, those days are gone, right? It is now about what specific type of beef is it? Is it certified Angus beef? Is it grass-fed Charolais? What is it? Tell me what it is, right? And so that's where you get into this opportunity of what I see as an opportunity of the consumer market has bifurcated, and there are different segments that are interested in different things and value different things. And to the extent that we can align supply chains around those specific attributes and align incentives within the supply chain from Kent and his Tyson brands all the way back to Debbie as the producer, I think that's where we're going to get these objectives, because quote unquote consumers as a monolith don't care that 58% of producers have a grazing plan. They don't care about that. The producer who wants to buy, or excuse me, the consumer who wants to buy carbon neutral beef cares about what's in that supply chain. And that's different than beef. So I just would call that out. And, you know, I approach this from an ag tech perspective. That's where I've spent the last several years of my career, and then now, you know, where I'm involved with Merck Animal Health Ventures. And from a technology perspective, these are all things that technology can solve, but these are not technology problems, right? These are not technology problems. These are market problems. And the question is, what consumers are willing to pay for what information, and how are those incentives split among the value chain? I hear a lot of times about technology companies bringing products to market where the producer is going to pay for a technology, but it's the brand that's going to get the benefit of it. Those products will never be adopted, right? You have to, where the cost is incurred of the technology has to mirror where the benefits are accrued. So going back strictly to a, from an environment sustainability perspective, what I'm interested in is technologies that deliver an ROI to the producer on a standalone basis, right? Just deliver straight productivity value proposition. If there are benefits into how that helps the producer engage in the supply chain later on, as you go downstream, that's gravy, right? But you have to have an independent value proposition for the producer in order for it to make sense. Because otherwise, going back to the economic sustainability, it just doesn't work.
Can I follow up on that? So I really appreciate your passion and your excitement for the future of this, because I agree with you, Jeanette, that is where we have to go, that the consumers are able to pay for some of this stuff that we need to get accomplished, right? And our cows do emit methane, right? So we do have to face that, and there are some changes that can be made on every single farm and ranch, even if you feel that you are very sustainable. But so along those same lines, I've been involved in the sustainability conversation for a very long time. It's been, almost 10 years probably that I've worked very much with different organizations, different corporations, trying to come up with ways to certify that their beef supply chain is sustainable. And early on in the beginning, it was very, very top down. But when the conversation continued, when I stepped away from that conversation and said, we can't do it that way. It cannot be a top down, check these boxes and you're sustainable thing. Then it didn't stop the conversation. It was still going to happen. So when the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef started to form, I realized at that time it was going to be very founded on producer input. And the first thing that we did, of course, like I said, was define sustainability. But the next thing that we did was decide how we're going to measure sustainability all along the value chain. Listen, we spent years talking about how to measure sustainability. And to be very honest, the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef is not going to market beef. We are not going to certify that my beef is sustainable and yours is not. That's not what we're about. But we created the measures that the entire value chain agrees upon are great ways to measure sustainability. So when we look at the farm and ranch and we talk about how to measure water resources or employee safety, right? We are looking at it from an entire value chain perspective, saying, yes, that's a great way. So my hope is, number one, that we show pre-competitive that the entire beef value chain in America is the most sustainable beef in the world. And I think we have been able to show that pretty easily. But the next step is going to be now with those exciting marketing proposals that are going to come up. And I am hoping that because of all the work that we've done for years, that we will be able to provide some of those metrics and ways to measure sustainability to those different marketing companies that are looking for that, because we've done all the work and we agree upon it throughout the entire beef value chain. So I'm hoping you get me really excited, Jeanette. Thank you for that passion that you're talking about.
And I just think there's a corollary that I have this fundamental belief that where there's a market, there's a way, right? And so here you guys are figuring out these metrics, putting these in place, making it very accessible then for brands to step in and grab that. And then once we have incentives, now here we go, aligning that value chain around it.
Exactly. That would be great.
Which for me at Tyson, that's the critical component that people lose sight of, because we always talk about really a lot of the conversation centers around commercial commodity cattle going into USDA graded product. And then, how do we then take the opportunity that the consumer will pay more and add value to attribute-based products, and then let that money flow back to the producer community? Because talk about sustainability, that's the only thing then that becomes sustainable in changing some of, perhaps the measurements of the best practices that we're already doing, but changing the minds of the consumers that are getting fed misinformation about the beef industry in its totality. So finding information on specific attributes that appeals to consumers and then creating programs around that, I think is so important to allow for those dollars to go back to the producer level, where then they can also reap the benefits of some of the understandings, some of the improvements, and some of the measurements. With that comes this dangerous area when it comes to marketing. I mean, if you really think of marketing and think of all the consumer goods that you buy, very few of them really talk about the inner workings of that iPhone that you have or the technical details of the shoes that you bought, right? It's about what did they make you feel and your elements of status in buying them. And if you feel like this is a better thing to save the world or provide for your family. And we've got to lean into that on the marketing side, right? Lean into that, what I call the feels with, as Debbie said, all of the information that backs that up from a critical metric standpoint so that it is definable, so that it is credible, and so that it has a foundation for those consumers that do want to dig into it, or for the media that wants to dig into it further. I'm excited by the direction that we're going because of this opportunity in things like environmentally responsible product or climate friendly product, because I think those really are what consumers are gravitating towards now out of sustainability, because sustainability is fairly nebulous in its definition, but environment they get, climate they get, because the iPhone feeds them a news feed about climate issues all the time. So if we can talk about how we are a good part of not only that environment, but in changing some of that climate conversation around methane and carbon equivalents with some of the best practices, then I think we get the consumer hooked.
Yeah. If I may, Amy, I'm not sure if this is okay. I have a time to do this, but I'd like to, identify some of the information, those key metrics that we've talked about. If anybody's interested in seeing really all of the work that the U.S. Roundtable has done and how we define each of those metrics and how we propose that they be measured at every level, they can go to the website for U.S. Roundtable or USRSB, U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, usrsb.org, on the resources tab. So there's two things there that are available. If anybody's interested in just seeing what sustainability might mean to their sector, they can go to the self-assessment tool. And if they want to dig deeper into each one of those and what they mean, for example, I talked about a grazing management plan. Thank you, Amy, for putting that up in the chat. There is then a specific module that's just an outreach module. It's interactive. There's video, there's questions, good information about what a grazing management plan might contain, as well as links. So those educational modules, outreach modules, and the self-assessment tool on that website are full of good information. So thank you for letting me encourage people to dig deeper.
That's great. No, and I did put it in the chat, usrsb.org on the resources tab. So there were two questions that came in through the Q&A, and they both relate to I think, consumer understanding. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, I'd like each of your perspectives on where the beef industry has been on educating and helping consumers understand your industry, right? In a world in which, 99% of us are far away from the protein that is being grown to feed us. But also, I see in the chat, in the Q&A, but I also hear in the world an interest by producers in telling their story better. So you each have a different part of that elephant, if you will. So maybe Kent, you kick us off, and let's go to Jeanette and to Debbie and talk about what it takes to do compelling storytelling and sharing of information and education here.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Okay, if I knew the exact answers, I'd be running my own marketing agency, right? But and selling all kinds of different products to everybody. So it's a difficult question at best. However, back to the idea of the consumer and how key they are to the entire process. One of the questions was about grass-fed beef, for instance, right? And if we look at the amazing model that we have in North America that allows for row crop to be fed to animals that has an enormously efficient rate of gain that leads to a fantastic product. Why are we talking about grass-fed as something that, not to denigrate anybody that is a grass-fed producer, except that what we could do, though, is explain perhaps that eating grass for the animal is a good portion of their life, if not the majority of their life, before they go on feed. So we're looking at explaining that a little bit better through claims like grain and grass-fed, grass and grain-fed, and tying those into elements that are environmentally responsible. Because what we need to decouple with the consumer, and this is the tricky part, are a lot of different elements that are not necessarily the most efficient or the most environmentally sustainable, that otherwise get lumped in with all of the good things about beef, like no antibiotics or no growth promotants. And those have their place as part of the choice in the beef market. But when you talk about sustainability and efficiency and keeping the carbon footprint low, those are not really the direction that we want to go. So how do we open up the consumer mind to think of sustainable, environment, climate-friendly product as being something that incorporates the innovations, both in the ranching and on the medical side, that help for the animals to come to market faster, with better quality, all of the things that we've been doing. Now, again, where you end up, Amy, is this, what I call the disability of expertise, is you just naturally wanting to tell them everything, all the details, but instead you got to find where the heart lies and then work backwards into the detail. So in my mind, our goal in our next development of a program is climate. How do we get a product that speaks to the concern about climate, and then work backwards through that to discuss the particulars of how raising cattle are actually a good thing for the environment.
I love that. I love that. Like, start with what the consumer, so because we do fall in the world in the gap between agriculture and food. We fall into this space where someone somewhere gets consumers hooked on an idea. Grass-fed beef is a perfect example, right? That somehow, but I could do it for every category of agriculture, where there is this ideal that has been fed to consumers, which actually is not really aligned with what consumers are actually interested in, right? Climate or environmental benefits or whatever, or animal welfare for that matter. And so, grass-fed beef doesn't necessarily meet any of those conditions that you told us consumers are most interested in, but it has an idea. And so let's talk a little bit more. Debbie, Jeanette, jump in here. What do you guys think about how we, I'm going to use this word provocatively, educate consumers?
Can I just say?
Go ahead. Well, I just want to say one quickie thing, and then Jeanette, you're going to hit it because you are great. I never criticize grass-fed beef. We are so lucky here in America that we have so many choices and so many marketing opportunities. And so I don't want to come across as the fact that maybe we're criticizing that, because I think I don't raise grass-finished beef. I do raise grass-fed beef. All beef is fed grass most of its life, but I want to make sure that we're not criticizing that whatsoever, because that's the beauty of the cow, right? She's got this rumen that can take grass that I can't eat and make it into this awesome protein that I can eat. So that's the beauty of the cow. But Jeanette, you have something a lot smarter to say. So I just wanted to
No, you can't beat the rumen. I mean, the rumen wins. That's the trump card there. So I couldn't agree with Debbie and Kent more. I mean, completely agree with everything they just said. I don't know why we in agriculture like to talk so much about educating the consumer, right? What other industry does that? No one asked me to go get educated on gasoline or tires or any other thing that I buy. So why is it that we, with quite a bit of hubris, put that burden on the consumer who wants to buy our product? Why on earth would we do that to ourselves? It's, I think it's well, we can talk about a lot of reasons that is. We won't do that today. But I guess point being, again, I think it comes back to, instead of this nebulous, let's educate the consumer and put the burden on them of, here's all of our hundreds and hundreds of years of science across multiple disciplines from all of our land-grant universities. Here you go, consumer. what if we were to package that up in a palatable way? Again, recognizing that consumers are not a monolith. What is the attribute? So when Kent talks about this carbon conscious consumer, they're concerned about some specific things. How do you package that up and market to them in a way that is specific to them? Talking specifically about the 4 major greenhouse gases or whatever that looks like, right? So I think that's like we're not that good at marketing in agriculture. Let's just call it. We like to think we are. We're not that good. Unfortunately, we don't have to be that good because we have really good products, right? But when you start to tease out some of these additional opportunities, there's a lot of that onus is going to have to be put on brand managers, whether that is at a processor level or whether that is at a retailer level. The food companies that are going to be packaging up these messages for consumers. So I think that's just a really big distinction here is we should not put the burden on the industry of needing to launch an education campaign, nor should we put the burden on consumers of needing to get educated, because that sounds excruciating for everyone.
And yet, I completely agree with you. And yet, I will say that there is, particularly in the beef sector, there is a vacuum of great stories. So as we talked about, there are, a diversity of producers with a diversity of stories that they could be telling about their operation, whether it's Debbie's operation or whether it's, Western beef operation, and they're all going to look and sound and feel different. Don't we want to expose consumers to the Debbies of the world, the folks who are actually out there doing the work and telling us what it actually looks like? I mean, Kent, how do you feel about that? How do you connect
unquestionably, I tell you what, as somebody that gets to market beef and pork, love working with beef producers because it's a romantic, interesting part of, and forgive anybody who raises hogs as well. It's infinitely more difficult to paint a beautiful picture of a hog barn than it is a rolling field with cattle in it. But those stories, I mean, tying it together with what Jeanette is talking about, educating the consumers. Like one of the things that we have done, for instance, is develop some really good traceability systems. Thinking that we work with the DNA traceable system at 3 of our plants right now. And that we thought was the greatest thing ever. It allows us to keep track of where the cattle came from. It allows for a wonderful business-to-business selling story. What we didn't realize until we did a little more research was that it's one of those Frankenstein things in the consumer's minds that they don't want to know. They don't want to. What they really want to know is they want to know that who grew that animal. They want to know that that brand or that product is tied back to a farmer or rancher. Now, if the vehicle to ultimately prove that as credible marketing is DNA traceability, great. But don't try to explain the sampling system and the verification of DNA to the consumer because they don't want to know that. They don't have the time nor the energy. What they want to know is that the producer. And at that point, you get licensed to then show these great stories, to show the hard work that comes from someone like Mark Trossel getting up in the morning to break the ice on stock tanks, to show what it really means to put the effort in to bring the food to the table for the American consumer. And then that's actually what they're interested in. Our vehicle for that is with our branded programs. We do it sometimes with our larger commodity brand with IBP, but again, because there's value in our branded programs, we create a brand around something like environmental responsible, and then we tie that back to the people actually growing the animals, and then the consumer gets involved, and no matter what, that product tastes good to them.
Yeah, that's a great example. I'd like to draw attention specifically to Mark's question. Did any of us break water on a stock tank this morning, right? Well, I didn't break water, but that's because we have automatic waterers that are protected from the cold right here in Kansas. But I did get up at 2 o'clock this morning to check for heifers because we have about 5 calves on the ground and life is really cold right now. So we are watching those things. Mark, I appreciate your question. And somebody else asked though, how can we really tell our stories from the farm and ranch, right? What can we do, each individual? And I've been talking about this since 2009, about us getting out there and really connecting with people. And the bottom line that I believe is we each have our own audience. And we don't have to go very far to reach that audience. If you talk to your neighbors, you go to your kid's basketball game, you talk to the people sitting around you, you explain to them that I had to get up early this morning and I'm still in my work clothes because I was out working with cattle. I'm doing these things. It's all about taking care of the animals. It's all about being there for my family. Those things are really key, and we're able to communicate that individually. Then that can ladder up as time goes on to people like Tyson that are creating this program that they want to market, right? Or to other people. I have hosted quite a few tours on my place. That's a really scary thing to do, but I have opened up our ranch to have food bloggers and just some chefs and some different people that are not at all connected with agriculture come and tour our ranch. Sometimes I even take them to a local feed yard, and they're absolutely amazed at how great things are here. They're really absolutely thrilled to know that it's people like me and my family that are calving those cows, that are taking care of them, that are feeding them. And then they say, okay, where can I buy your beef? I want to buy Debbie's beef. And right now, my answer to them is go to the grocery store and the restaurant, because it's people like me that are selling beef in those locations. So you're actually supporting local beef by buying there. Now, I know that goes against here branded beef conversation, but listen, there's an awful lot of beef out there that we just need to get eaten as well. And for us to take advantage of the conversation around sustainability, I think that's where we start looking at some of those branded programs, the ability to get paid by sharing information, just basically the communication. So the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef has worked very hard to become that communication vehicle, the ability for truly to be a round table, for all of us to sit around the same table, whether you are a fast food franchisee owner or a packer or a processor, a feed yard operator, a member of an organization that is concerned about the environment. We have those members all over the roundtable, and we all sit at the same table, and we're all working to increase beef consumption. And the key thing with that is being able to continue to do it in a way that we can pass it on to our kids, right? I don't want to pass on a job that's just so dadgum hard, getting up and breaking ice in stock tanks, checking cattle in the middle of the night. It's a hard job. It better be an appropriate job for me to pass on to my kids. Fundamentally, it's about the land, right? Fundamentally, it's about taking care of the land and passing that on to our kids, but it's also about doing the right thing. And I just think that where we stand right now with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef is we've been seeing all kinds of goals put out there by certain corporations, sustainability goals, greenhouse gas goals, things like that. Well, so the Roundtable has been working, and it started right before COVID, but we've been working very hard to create full value chain sustainability goals. As you can imagine, that's really hard to do with having everybody working together to create those goals. It's even harder over Zoom. So we worked really hard, but they are just about done. We are just about ready to roll those out. They will come out the end of April at our annual meeting, and I think they are going to make a tremendous impact because they are full value chain sustainability goals.
Thank you.
I would just
Thanks,
tie
Debbie.
those.
I want to, Lynn, we've got about 10 minutes left, and Jeanette, I'm actually going to throw it to you so you can say what you want to say. But I also want us to look forward, as picking up on Debbie's comment here. You know, every rancher I've talked to wants to hand the operation down, wants the legacy, wants to transfer it, and I want to know. We talked a lot about the consumers, but the basics of the job are the basics of the job. And I'm interested in where we see technology and improvements in other parts of actually producing beef that might make the job easier, more profitable, and less risky, less up and down for Debbie's kids. So why don't you pick up there?
Excellent. So, and I let me just start by, I would tie together what Debbie and Kent just said as I think about everything they just talked about. There's kind of three layers here, right? The base layer is well, let's say 3.5. The very base layer is what are the behaviors throughout the entire supply chain, the entire value chain, right? The layer on top of that that's going to drive those behaviors is what are the incentives through the value chain.
Right.
Then that middle layer is what's the mechanism that we are documenting and capturing data and verifying what's happening through the value chain. That's your technology question, right? And then that top layer goes back to what Ken was talking about of, okay, then what's the mechanism? What's the user interface, right? What's the portion of this that gets presented to consumers, which consumers,
Sure.
which messages, for what purpose, right? So I think about that layer. And I would say, I'm constantly looking at technology companies. I see companies working at all of those layers, right? There are companies working on traceability. There are companies working on, what does that user interface look like? How do we improve the interaction between brand and consumer? If you think about the fact that the experience at the meat case has not changed in 40 years, it just hasn't, right? I mean, there's not new information. There's not, it's very static from a meat case perspective. And so how do you change that all the way through to, what's happening in processing plants from an automation and robotics perspective and the data collection that's happening there that can drive different decisions all the way back to precision livestock management and beef cattle, which has actually in a lot of ways and for very valid reasons that have nothing to do with producers, but from a technology perspective, that space has been slower to have really good precision livestock tools available, right? And so I think all of those things are going to change, and we're going to see technology solutions coming throughout all 3.5 of those layers that I identified.
So Amy, if I heard you, like, how do we take out some of the commodity swings that are involved in the ups and downs and the viability of passing on ranching life from one generation to the next? Is honestly, I think it is through brands and it is through attribute understanding at the consumer level. As long as we have the majority of animals getting bought and sold in a commercial commodity environment, that's great. We're going to have that underpinning. Now, what we honestly want to do is pass along the value that we get from the attribute-based programs back through the system. So if you have, if you think of that as a risk management model, yes, some portion of what you do, I would hope, is having cattle that are part of a growing thing, whether it be NAE cattle, Angus cattle, environmentally responsible cattle, because the incremental dollars that come from that on top of the commodity value, it's always on top of the commodity value, is what's going to be a smoothing effect for the entire value chain. Now, part of that, though, in being part of that value chain is, one, having the traceability and the transparency that we can use in talking to the consumer so that they feel comfortable, that they see all the wonderful stories, but then also so that information through traceability goes back to the producer so that then they can use that information to continue with best practices and understanding exactly what it is we're looking for as a packer to bring to a customer that then delivers that to the consumer that eats the product. And so you got to get comfortable with sharing that information. And I know that there's a relative historical distrust through the supply chain with some of the parts, and we all have to get over that, because in order to get that consumer to fully understand our business, sharing that information is critical.
Kent, I'm not going to disagree with you about sharing information. I think that's totally important. And that's what we work towards at the roundtable too. But I think it's also what we need to pay attention to is not necessarily sharing absolutely every piece of information, right? You're not asking me to tell you every single thing I do on my ranch. There's some pretty key things. One of the questions in the chat, Amy, I'm going to just touch base on one of those, is what can we do right now to reduce emissions, right? What can we do on the farm right now? Well, there's two quick things that I'm going to tell you that I've also heard somebody else say who's been in the financial sector. Number one, that is going to be start a grazing management plan. Start working, documenting what your grazing management is. Do you rotationally graze? Do you create new fences? Do you create new paddocks? What does the grass look like today versus next year? Start that. I believe part of the foundation of a lot of these programs that are going to trace back to the ranch that will be a sustainability marketing opportunity is going to ask us to what do we do with the grazing management plan? So if you start, you've already got the beginnings of that happening, then you've already got a jump start on that. The other thing that I would say, that this is something I mention all the time, tag your calves with a simple ear tag. I am not even asking for an EID tag, but if you are the person that tags your calves, that means you trace them back to the cow. And you can then decide on those cows that are either not raising a calf every year or they're raising a crappy calf every year, and you get rid of them. Every single cow on my operation consumes resources, but does she produce in exchange for that? And if she doesn't, she is not sustainable and she needs to go. So the only way to know that is to tag your calves. Absolutely simple.
Those are
I would just call out that that's also such an interesting example of this idea of what's good for the producer's economics is also good for other objectives. Like these do not need to be or conversations, and there will sometimes be trade-offs, yes, but there are a lot of places where what's good for producers is also good for the value chain and is also good from an environmental perspective.
Yeah,
I was going to jump in at that exact same thing. Jeanette, I thought the point that you made around where is technology going to provide information, and Kent, you jumped on this too, information back to producers that's actually going to be actionable and helpful. And then Debbie, your point about what information needs to get shared across the value chain that consumers actually need, rather than having specifics of how you run your private operation that will vary from place to place. So we've got 3 minutes left. I'm going to ask each of you to do, one takeaway 5 years from now, when we're talking about sustainable beef. What are we talking about? Is it different, or is this the same conversation?
So my goal on the roundtable would be that the American public believes that all beef is sustainable. American beef is the most sustainable in the world, which is the truth today already, and that they are already supportive of sustainability as a conversation. I also would hope that producers would be getting paid for that marketing of sustainable beef. That's my future goals. And, so far I've not gotten paid anything for all of the time that I've spent on the roundtable. But I still believe that it's the right thing for me to be doing, because I want to make sure that this ranch is here for my kids. I have 5 kids and they will all inherit this ranch. They're already working on it now. That's the bottom line. It's legacy. It's beef consumption. I love it.
Yeah, I'd say in looking at the data, 76% of consumers as of this past fall say they want to know where their beef comes from. And so I think continuing to tell those stories about the producer community and how they are evolving into an even more sustainable production practice system is so important. So that we say, hey, guess what? We don't have it all figured out, but let's show the consumers who the great people are that are making this product and how they work every day to make it even more sustainable, more environmentally responsible, and more important to a climate goal. And 5 years from now, I hope that we're doing a terrific job at that.
Okay, I'll offer 2. I'll just say that I think in 5 years that we see a bigger percentage, let's just go big and call it 25% of cattle that are sold through dedicated supply chains, which means that they are aligned around some specific attribute, and those incentives are shared all the way through back to producers. And then the second thing, I think that in 5 years, I think we see very mature carbon markets, and carbon sequestration becomes another path to monetization for cow-calf producers, and that is going to really change a lot of the economics and dynamics and incentives as we think about beef.
Wow. This was such an amazing conversation. Thank you, Kent Harrison with Tyson, Jeanette Bernard with Merck Animal Health Ventures, Debbie Lyons-Blythe with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and Blythe Family Farms. I will just say that at Farm Journal and Drovers, we're committed to helping producers on the path in ways to be action-oriented, maintain and enhance profitability, and meet consumer expectations as they shift. So Trust in Beef is our commitment to doing that. You can find more at trustandbeef.com. You can also find more at drovers.com. And Farm Country Updates are a monthly update that we provide here at Farm Journal out into the community. Next month, you all get a far better host than me in Chip Flory, who will take a look into the commodity crystal ball. So take a look for signing up for that one, and see you back next month. Thank you all very much, and thank you to our terrific panelists. This was great.